Caleb Warren woke up before sunrise, just the way he had for most of his life. The ranch was quiet, the sky still holding the last shade of night. Cool air touched his face when he stepped outside, carrying the smell of dry grass, earth, and the faint scent of morning dew. The world felt peaceful, almost frozen, as if waiting for the day to begin. Caleb liked these early hours. He felt calm, free, and connected to the land he had lived on since childhood. He walked toward the barn, ready to start his morning chores. His boots made soft crunching sounds on the gravel path. The horses inside the barn shifted when they heard him approach, recognizing the familiar rhythm of his steps. Caleb smiled to himself. He enjoyed simple routines, feeding the horses, checking the fences, walking the fields. Life at the ranch wasn't fancy, but it felt right to him. But that morning, something unusual caught his eye. Far at the edge of the long dirt road that led toward the main gate, a small figure was walking a person, moving slowly, almost dragging their feet. Caleb stopped, squinting in the dim light. It was rare to see visitors so early, especially someone walking on foot. The nearest town was several miles away, and most people who came to the ranch drove. The figure grew closer, and Caleb noticed it was a woman. She was wearing dusty clothes, her hair pulled back, and she clutched a large old sack close to her chest. It looked heavy, and she seemed tired, almost unsteady with each step. Something about her posture felt urgent yet fragile. Caleb put down the bucket he was holding and walked toward the fence, keeping his pace steady. He didn't want to frighten her. As she reached the gate, she held onto the wooden bar as if she needed it for support. Her breathing sounded faint, like someone who had walked too far without rest. "Ma'am," Caleb said softly. "Are you all right? Do you need water?" The woman lifted her head. Her eyes looked worried, exhausted, but also strangely hopeful, like she had been searching for help for a long time, and was afraid she might not get it. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stared at him, hugging the sack even tighter. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Please, take them off." Caleb's eyebrows pulled together in confusion. He opened the gate slowly and stepped toward her. "Take what off?" he asked gently. She pushed the sack toward him, her hands trembling. It looked worn out, tied with an old rope. The bottom of it was stained with dirt, and the fabric looked stretched, as if something inside had recently moved or shifted. She didn't loosen her hold completely, almost as if letting go frightened her, but she offered it enough that Caleb could reach it. "Please," she whispered again. "I can't carry them anymore. You have to take them off." Her words didn't make sense, but her fear felt real. Caleb looked at her carefully. She wasn't injured. She didn't look dangerous. She simply appeared exhausted, desperate, and overwhelmed by whatever she had been holding on to. "Let's get you inside," Caleb said calmly. "You look worn out. You need rest." The woman nodded weakly. Caleb gently took the heavy sack from her arms. The moment he did, her shoulders dropped as if she had been carrying much more weight than he realized. She inhaled deeply, her breath shaky but relieved. He held the sack with both hands. It wasn't shaped like anything he recognized. It definitely wasn't filled with tools or clothes. The weight felt uneven, and he thought he heard a faint sound from inside, something soft, like a tiny movement or a rustle. Caleb led her toward the porch. She walked slowly, one hand sliding along the wooden rail for balance. Once she was seated in the old wooden chair, he brought her a glass of cold water. She drank it quickly, her hands shaking slightly. "What's your name?" Caleb asked gently. "Emily," she said softly. "Emily Hart." "That's a long walk from town," Caleb said. "Did you come all the way on foot?" She nodded. I didn't know where else to go." Caleb didn't push for more answers. He had met many people over the years, travelers, hikers, tired strangers looking for help. Sometimes people needed space before they found the courage to speak. Emily glanced at the sack, now resting beside his boots. Her eyes widened slightly, as if worried he might not open it. "You have to look," she said. "They need help. I tried. I really tried. But I couldn't carry them any farther." Caleb felt a strange tension fill the air. He knelt beside the sack. The rough rope tying it shut was twisted tight, as if someone wanted to make sure nothing came out during a long journey. The fabric looked old, almost fragile. He placed one hand on the sack. It was warm, too warm for something that had been carried in the cool morning air. "Emily," he said softly. "What's inside?" She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "Please, just open it." There was something fragile in her voice, something that made Caleb decide not to question it any further. He untied the knot carefully, pulling the rope loose until the sack's opening relaxed. Emily leaned forward despite looking tired, as if she couldn't wait another second. Caleb opened the fabric slowly. He expected tools, or maybe something she collected along the road. But what he found made him freeze in place. His breath caught for a moment. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Inside, wrapped in soft pieces of cloth, were tiny forms, small shapes curled together, breathing faintly. Caleb felt his heart jump in surprise because they were not objects. They were living beings. Emily watched him anxiously, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair. "I found them. I couldn't leave them." Caleb looked back into the sack. Whatever was inside was delicate, helpless, and in need of immediate care. He lifted his head again, meeting Emily's eyes. "How long have you been carrying them?" he asked quietly. "All night," she whispered. "I didn't stop. I thought if I stopped, they might not make it." Her voice cracked, not with fear, but with deep emotional weight, like someone who had done everything she could and still worried it wasn't enough. Caleb gently closed the sack again, but not tightly. He didn't want to disturb whatever was inside. He understood now why she looked so drained physically and emotionally. "You did the right thing bringing them here," he said softly. Emily lowered her head in relief. "I didn't know if anyone would believe me," she said. "People sometimes, they think I overreact. But I couldn't ignore them. Not when they were crying like that." Caleb nodded. He could see the honesty in her eyes, the sincerity in her trembling hands. She wasn't seeking attention. She wasn't trying to create a story. She simply wanted to save the small lives she had found. "Let's get them inside," Caleb said. "We'll figure out what to do next." Emily nodded gratefully. Together, they stepped into the quiet warmth of the ranch house. The morning sun was just starting to rise outside, lighting the sky in soft orange and gold. But inside, the atmosphere shifted into something more serious, something filled with urgency, mystery, and the beginning of an unexpected bond between two strangers who had crossed paths for a reason neither yet understood. Caleb placed the sack gently on the table, preparing himself for a closer look. Emily stood beside him, her hands clasped together tightly, her eyes filled with both worry and hope. Whatever was inside that sack had brought her across miles of empty roads and through the cold night. And now, it was about to change the quiet rhythm of Caleb's peaceful morning in ways he never imagined. Caleb stood beside the old wooden table, the morning light slowly filling the room through the small window. Emily remained close, her hands pressed together, as if she were silently praying. The mysterious sack sat between them, slightly open from when Caleb had untied it, and a soft warmth continued to rise from it. The air inside the room felt different, full of quiet tension and a growing sense of responsibility. Caleb took a slow breath and carefully pulled the cloth open. Emily leaned forward, worry tightening her face. This time, Caleb opened the sack completely. His eyes widened once more as he studied the tiny shapes fully. Inside were 3 small newborn animals, curled up together in layers of old cloth. Their fur was short and golden, their bodies no bigger than his hand. They were breathing faintly, their chests rising and falling with delicate, almost invisible movements. One of them stretched its tiny paw and let out the softest sound. Something between a whimper and a squeak. Caleb knew what they were almost immediately. He had seen them only a few times in his life, and never this close. They were rare desert fox pups, a species that usually lived deep in the rocky hills far from human homes. Seeing them here, in a sack carried for miles by a lone woman, felt unreal. Emily watched Caleb's reaction carefully. Are they okay?" she whispered. Caleb gently touched one pup with the back of his finger. Its fur felt cool, too cool for newborns. Their eyes hadn't opened yet, and their tiny noses twitched weakly. They needed warmth, food, and care, and they needed it quickly. "They're alive," Caleb said softly, "but they're very weak." Emily's shoulders trembled. She placed one hand over her mouth, as if she was afraid she might cry. "I tried to keep them warm," she whispered. "I wrapped them in my scarf, but the night was cold." Caleb nodded, understanding exactly what she must have gone through. The desert nights could be harsh, especially if someone was walking for hours. He could imagine Emily carrying the pups close to her body, trying to shield them from the cold wind. "How did you find them?" he asked gently. Emily took a shaky breath before answering. "I was walking along the old trail near the dried riverbed. I go there sometimes to clear my mind. I heard a small sound. Just a tiny cry. It didn't even sound like an animal at first. More like someone whispering." She paused as if returning to the moment. "I followed the sound and found them under a bush, half covered in sand. They were alone. No adult fox. No nest. Nothing." Caleb frowned softly. "Did you wait to see if the mother came back?" "I did," Emily said quickly. "I waited for a long time. Almost an hour. But nothing moved in the area. And the sun was getting strong. I got scared they would not make it if I left them there." Caleb could see the honesty in her expression. She had acted out of pure concern, not carelessness. She didn't know exactly what to do, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Some people might have ignored the tiny cries, but Emily had listened. "You did the right thing," Caleb said. Emily exhaled, relief softening her face. Still, the worry didn't disappear. She kept staring at the pups, her eyes filled with fear that she might lose them now after carrying them so far. Caleb stood up and went to the kitchen shelves. He took down a small bottle, a clean cloth, and the old heating lamp he kept for newborn lambs during winter. The lamp flickered to life, casting a warm glow around the table. Emily watched him, her eyes following every movement. "You know how to take care of them?" she asked quietly. "I've raised animals all my life," Caleb replied. "These little ones aren't like the animals I usually care for, but warmth is the first thing they need. Then food. We'll start slow." He placed the heating lamp near the pups, adjusting it so the warmth spread evenly. The pups shifted slightly, as if reacting to the change. Emily let out a small breath of relief. When she saw them wiggle, "They're responding," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "That's a good sign. They're cold, but they're still fighting." Emily stood closer, watching the tiny animals as if they were the most delicate things she had ever seen. She gently touched the edge of the cloth, careful not to disturb them too much. "I didn't know what they were," she said. "I've never seen anything like them." "They're desert fox pups," Caleb explained softly. "Rare ones. They usually stay hidden. The fact that you found them is surprising and concerning." Emily looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Caleb rested his hands on the edge of the table. "Their mother should have been nearby. Foxes don't leave their newborns unless something happens. Something must have scared her off, or maybe she couldn't return." Emily swallowed hard. "Then, if I hadn't gone there, they wouldn't have survived," Caleb finished gently. Emily lowered her head, overcome with emotion. "I'm glad I heard them," she whispered. "I couldn't explain why, but I just knew I couldn't leave them." Caleb nodded with genuine respect. Not everyone would have shown that level of care for small, helpless animals in the middle of nowhere. Emily had acted on compassion, and that made all the difference. Caleb looked back at the pups. One of them, the smallest, seemed especially weak. Its tiny chest rose slowly, and it barely moved. Caleb recognized the danger. The smallest one needed extra attention. "We'll need to feed them soon," he said. I can prepare warm milk for now. Something gentle. Not too much. Their stomachs are delicate. I can help, Emily said immediately. Tell me what to do. Her eagerness brought a small smile to Caleb's face. He appreciated her determination, especially considering how exhausted she was. You should rest first, he said. You've walked a long way. But Emily shook her head. I'll rest later. They need help now. Please let me help. Caleb saw that arguing wouldn't work. She was stubborn in the quiet, sincere way of someone who cared deeply. And he understood that staying involved would also ease her worry. All right, he said. Let's do this together. They worked side by side in the small kitchen. Caleb warmed a tiny amount of milk, testing the temperature on his wrist. Emily prepared clean cloths and gently adjusted the pups under the heating lamp. Every now and then, one of the pups made a soft sound, reminding them how fragile life could be. As they worked, Emily began to talk slowly at first, then more openly. She told Caleb about the tough months she had been through, how she had moved to the countryside to start over, hoping for peace. She didn't go into heavy details, but Caleb understood enough to sense her loneliness and the strength she had built by surviving difficult times. Finding the pups, she said, felt like a moment she was meant to be there for. Caleb listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He understood that sometimes people needed someone simply to hear them. Soon, the milk was ready, and Caleb filled a small dropper. He lifted one of the pups gently and angled it so its tiny mouth could reach the drop of warm milk. At first, the pup didn't react, but after a few seconds, it began to suck weakly. Emily watched in amazement, tears forming in her eyes again, but this time filled with hope, not fear. They're eating, she whispered, her voice soft with relief. Yes, Caleb said with a gentle smile. They're fighters. Together they fed each pup, even the weakest one, though it required more patience and gentleness. By the time they were done, the pups looked slightly more relaxed under the warm light. Emily sat down at the table, finally allowing herself to breathe. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but she didn't complain. She watched the pups with soft, protective eyes. You saved them, Caleb said. Emily shook her head lightly. No, we're saving them. Caleb's smile widened a little. In that quiet room, with the morning sun now fully lighting the walls, something unspoken but comforting grew between them. A connection built through shared effort, kindness, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the smallest lives can bring people together in the most unexpected ways. The morning that had begun like any other for Caleb had turned into something new, something that would change the path ahead for both him and Emily. And as the tiny pups slept under the warm light, their soft breaths steadying, Caleb knew that this was only the beginning. Caleb stayed beside the tiny pups, watching their small bodies breathe in gentle rhythm. The warm light from the lamp made their fur glow softly. Emily sat across the table, her shoulders slowly relaxing as she watched them settle into sleep. She looked tired, truly tired, but there was a certain calm spreading across her face that hadn't been there before. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she looked like she believed the pups had a real chance. Caleb stood up and stretched his back. He had been bent over the table for a long time. Emily tried to get up too, but her legs wobbled a little. Caleb quickly reached out to steady her. You should sit for a bit, he said gently. Emily gave a small, tired smile. I'm okay. I just stood too fast. Caleb nodded, though he could see exhaustion written clearly across her face. You walked for hours, he reminded her. Your body needs a break. Emily lowered her eyes. I didn't think about the distance. I just kept walking. Every time I felt tired, I heard them cry again. Caleb looked at her with quiet respect. There was no doubt in his mind Emily had risked her own strength to save the pups. That kind of heart wasn't something he saw often. Many people talked about compassion, but few carried it in their actions like she did. He checked the pups again. The smallest one was still weak, but its breathing had become steadier. Caleb gently adjusted the cloth around it. Emily watched him carefully. Do you think they'll be okay? She asked softly. I think they have a chance now, Caleb said. They're warm. They've eaten a little. That's already better than what they had before. Emily let out a slow breath filled with hope. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt peaceful, filled only with the soft hum of the heating lamp and the quiet morning outside. After a short silence, Caleb looked toward the door. I should set up a better place for them. The barn has more space and the tools we'll need. Emily nodded immediately. I'll help. Caleb shook his head gently. You need rest. You can help later. But Emily stepped forward, a determined look in her eyes. They made it this far because I didn't stop. I want to keep helping. Caleb paused, then nodded. He understood. Sometimes, taking care of something small gave people strength they didn't know they had. Together, they carried everything to the barn, the heating lamp, clean cloths, and a small wooden box Caleb filled with soft hay. The barn smelled warm and familiar. With sunlight slipping in through the cracks between the wooden boards, Emily walked slowly, holding the box with extreme care, as if afraid even the slightest movement would disturb the pups. Caleb prepared a corner of the barn, a safe place away from drafts. He placed the wooden box there and set up the lamp so its warmth would fall directly over the pups. Emily knelt beside the box as Caleb lifted each pup one by one, placing them gently in their new temporary bed. The smallest pup made a soft, high sound. Emily swallowed nervously. Is that normal? They're just adjusting, Caleb said. They're probably still hungry, but we can't overfeed them. Emily watched every move he made, wanting to learn. Caleb explained things as he went: the right temperature, the right amount of milk, the importance of warmth and rest. Emily listened with full attention, asking small questions here and there, making sure she understood everything. As they worked, the sun climbed higher, filling the barn with soft, golden light. The morning felt warm and alive, different from the tense hours they had spent earlier. Caleb stepped back for a moment and watched the pups sleep. Emily sat beside them, her eyes soft and gentle. You care about them a lot, Caleb said quietly. Emily looked up at him, a little surprised. Of course. They're so tiny. I couldn't walk away. Caleb leaned against a wooden post. Not many people would do what you did. Emily lowered her gaze. I wasn't always like this, she said softly. This past year taught me many things. It taught me that if you see something struggling, you help if you can. Because sometimes the smallest help changes everything. Caleb listened, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. He didn't push. When people had stories heavy in their hearts, they needed time before letting them out. Emily slowly began sharing more on her own. She told him how she had moved to the area after losing her job in the city. She felt lost, unsure of what direction to take in life. She had started walking nature trails every morning just to clear her mind and find peace. That's why I was there near the riverbed, she said. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted quiet. And then I heard them. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes life brings us what we're meant to find. Emily smiled faintly. It felt like they needed me, like they were calling for help, even though they're too small to understand anything. Caleb understood that feeling. He had lived long enough on the ranch to believe that fate sometimes placed certain responsibilities in front of people without warning. They worked together through the late morning, feeding the pups in small intervals. Every time one of the pups made a tiny sound, Emily's eyes filled with concern, until Caleb reassured her that it was normal. She had a natural gentleness that made her movements soft and careful. Hours passed. The sun reached its highest point, and the heat inside the barn grew thick. Caleb opened the side window to let cool air in. Emily wiped her forehead, tired but not complaining. You should eat something, Caleb said. He brought her a piece of bread and a glass of water. Emily took them gratefully. You should eat too, she said. Caleb chuckled softly. I will soon. Emily took small bites, her energy slowly returning. She looked at the pups again. The smallest one worries me. Caleb nodded. It's weak, but not hopeless. Can we make it stronger? She asked, her voice full of hope. We'll try, Caleb said. We'll take turns feeding them tonight. They can't go too many hours without warmth or food. Emily blinked, surprised. You mean, stay awake all night? Caleb nodded. If we want them to survive, yes. Emily didn't hesitate. I'll stay too. You should rest, he said again. She shook her head. I rested on the walk whenever I could. But I won't rest if I know they need help. Caleb looked into her eyes and saw the same determination that had pushed her to walk miles through the cold night. It wasn't stubbornness, it was genuine care. Kindness that ran deep. All right, he agreed. We'll do it together. And so they prepared for a long night. As the sun started to lower, the evening breeze moved gently through the fields. The ranch took on a golden glow. Caleb brought blankets and set them on the barn floor. Emily helped arrange everything so they would be comfortable while staying close to the pups. The pups woke up one by one, making small sounds. Emily fed the smallest with extreme care, her hands steady despite her tiredness. Caleb watched her quietly. You're good with them, he said. Emily looked surprised. I don't know what I'm doing. You're doing it with heart, Caleb replied. That matters. They stood side by side. Watching the smallest pup finally manage to drink a little more milk than before. It lifted its tiny head weakly, then snuggled closer to its siblings. Emily's eyes filled with emotion. It's trying, she whispered. Caleb nodded. It wants to live. The barn filled with a warm calmness as night slowly approached. Emily pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Caleb closed the barn door gently, leaving only a crack for fresh air. Outside, the sky darkened into shades of purple and deep blue. Stars began to appear one by one. Inside, the soft glow of the heating lamp lit the wooden walls, casting peaceful shadows. Emily leaned back against a hay bale, her head slightly drooping. Caleb sat nearby. Every few minutes, one of them checked the pups. Their breathing grew more even. Their bodies warmer. Their tiny sounds softer. Hours passed, but neither Caleb nor Emily felt bored or restless. They felt connected to the pups, to the quiet night, and unexpectedly, to each other. Emily looked at Caleb with tired but grateful eyes. Thank you, she said in a soft voice. For trusting me. For helping me. Caleb looked at her, the corners of his lips lifting gently. You helped them first. I'm just continuing what you started. Emily looked at the pups again, then back at Caleb. There was something warm between them, something new and unmistakable. The night deepened. The pups slept peacefully, and in that barn, under the soft light and star-filled sky, two people who had once been strangers found themselves sharing a moment that felt strangely meaningful, like the start of something neither of them had seen coming. He stood there for a long moment, holding the open sack in his hands, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the last few days. The cold morning wind brushed across the ranch, carrying with it a quiet stillness that always came before sunrise. But today the silence felt different. It felt heavy, like the world itself was waiting for his next move. Jacob slowly closed the sack again. But not because he wanted to hide what was inside. He simply needed a moment, time to breathe. Time to think. Time to understand why life had brought these strangers to his door, and why he suddenly felt responsible for them. When he finally turned around, Clara was still standing near the old wooden fence, watching him carefully. Her eyes showed exhaustion, but also hope. She had been running from fear for so long that she barely remembered what safety felt like, but something in Jacob's face gave her comfort. Even though she barely knew him, he walked toward her, each step slow and thoughtful. The morning light began touching the sky, painting its soft shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of sunrise that usually gave Jacob peace, but today it only reminded him that time was moving faster than he could understand. It's true, he whispered gently, his voice still unsteady. Everything you told me. It wasn't even half of what you were carrying. Clara nodded. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept them close to her chest, as if holding herself together. I tried to explain, she said quietly, but words never felt enough. I didn't know how to tell you everything. I didn't know if you'd believe me. Jacob looked down at the sack again. I believe you now, he said softly. For a long moment, they both stood without speaking. The only sound was the distant call of morning birds and the soft rustling of the grass. Clara's children stood nearby, their faces tired but curious. They trusted their mother, and because she wasn't afraid of Jacob, they weren't either. Jacob finally broke the silence. "You and the kids. You can stay here. As long as you need. No one will come looking for you out here. And even if they do," he added, with a firmness she hadn't seen before, "they'll have to go through me first." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but not from sadness this time. They came from relief. She had never asked anyone for help before. She had always been the one trying to protect her family, even when the world felt too big and too cruel. But hearing Jacob's words made her feel, for the first time in years, like she didn't have to carry everything alone. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means." Jacob made a small smile appear on his face, though his heart was still heavy. "I may not understand everything yet," he said, "but I understand enough. And sometimes that's enough to do the right thing." He guided them toward the small guest house near the barn. It wasn't fancy, just a simple room with an old fireplace, 2 small beds, and a wooden table. But it was warm and safe, and right now, safety was all they needed. Clara looked around the room, touching the faded curtains and the worn quilt on one of the beds. To her, it felt like a sanctuary. The children immediately sat down, grateful to rest. They whispered to each other quietly, their voices soft and tired. Clara tucked them in with gentle hands, smoothing their hair with a mother's love. Watching them slowly fall asleep made her heart ache. She had been strong for so long that she sometimes forgot how fragile they were. Jacob stood near the doorway, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed anything. He could see the exhaustion written all over her face. He had seen that look before in injured horses, in abandoned dogs, in broken people who came searching for second chances. But Clara's eyes carried something more. A quiet strength. A deep courage that had kept her alive through storms he couldn't even imagine. "Get some rest," he said softly. "You're safe here, all of you." Clara nodded slowly. "I believe you," she whispered again. And this time, she meant it with her whole heart. Jacob stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. He took a deep breath of the cold morning air, letting it fill his lungs. The sun had now risen completely, spreading golden light across the ranch. The fields glowed softly, and the horses began moving near the fence, curious about the new faces they had seen. But Jacob's thoughts were still tangled. The contents of the sack, the story Clara had shared, the danger she was escaping, everything weighed on him deeply. He knew that helping her meant stepping into a situation that might bring trouble to his quiet life, but he also knew something else. Doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. He walked back to the barn, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He leaned against the wooden wall, running a hand over his face. His mind replayed the moment he had opened the sack, the shock, the disbelief, the sudden understanding. Clara wasn't just trying to save herself. She had been protecting something important, something valuable, something that many people would chase for the wrong reasons. That was why she had whispered those words. "Please, take them off." She was begging for help, for protection, for someone to see the truth she had been carrying alone. And now Jacob held a responsibility he never expected. Hours passed quietly. The ranch continued its slow, peaceful rhythm. But Jacob stayed alert, watching the road, listening for sounds that didn't belong. He wasn't a man who enjoyed conflict, but he understood loyalty, and Clara needed someone loyal right now. Later in the afternoon, he returned to the guest house with warm food and soft blankets. Clara opened the door, looking more rested but still fragile. Her children were awake now, sitting at the small table and whispering to each other. When Jacob entered, both kids looked up with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. "I brought something for you all," Jacob said gently, placing the food on the table. The children's eyes lit up, and Clara smiled faintly. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. Jacob shook his head. "I know. But I wanted to." While they ate, he sat quietly near the fireplace, watching the small family come back to life. Their laughter was soft, almost shy, but it filled the room with warmth. For the first time since meeting them, Jacob saw a glimpse of who they were before fear had taken over their lives. When the meal ended, Clara looked at him with steady eyes. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I know this. We wouldn't have made it without you." Jacob felt something shift inside his chest. "Maybe," he replied. "We were meant to cross paths." Clara nodded slowly. "Maybe so." The evening settled gently over the ranch, coloring the sky with deep purples and fading gold. Jacob walked them outside, where the cool breeze touched their faces. The children pointed at the horses, amazed by their size and grace. Clara watched them with a soft smile, something Jacob hadn't seen before. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Safe. Right. Jacob looked at Clara. "No matter what happens next," he said, "you're not alone anymore." And for the first time in a very long time, Clara believed it. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that there were still good people in the world, people like Jacob, who didn't turn away when someone needed help. As night fell, the ranch felt like a new beginning, a place where fear could finally rest, a place where healing could start, a place where hope could grow again. And Clara knew. The day she whispered for help was the day her life began to change.